"I'll wash the dishes and you adopt us," said the poor girl with her brother in her arms to the millionaire CEO. And what he did next shocked everyone. Before we dive into the story, please leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any inspiring stories like this one. Let's get to the story. Rain was beating against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Diamond, Seattle's most exclusive restaurant, where a meal could cost more than most people's weekly salary. Mitchell sat alone at his usual corner table, his Armani suit as impeccable as his reputation in the tech world. At 36, he had everything money could buy, except the one thing he never thought he wanted. He was reviewing quarterly reports on his tablet when a small, trembling voice broke his concentration. "Excuse me, sir." Daniel looked up, annoyed by the interruption. Beside his table stood a little girl with tangled blonde hair and eyes the color of a winter sky. She couldn't be more than 7 years old, wearing a faded pink dress that had seen better days. In her thin arms, she held a small child, a boy with the same blonde hair and those same haunted blue eyes. "How did you get in here?" Daniel's voice was rough. This wasn't the kind of place where street children wandered around. The girl's chin trembled, but she straightened up. "Through the kitchen. The kind lady there gave us some bread." She shifted the sleeping boy in her arms, her small body struggling with his weight. "Are you important?" "I suppose so." Daniel looked around the restaurant, wondering where security was. "Where are your parents, child?" Something flashed across the girl's face, pain so raw it made Daniel's chest unexpectedly tighten. "They're with the angels now." The simple words hit harder than any boardroom confrontation Daniel had ever faced. He set his tablet aside, really looking at the children for the first time. The girl's dress wasn't just faded, it was too small, and there were dark circles under her eyes. The boy's clothes were clean but patched, and both children had that hollow look Daniel recognized from the charity galas he attended, but never really saw. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Emily. This is my brother Lucas. He's 3, and I'm 7. She took a deep, shaky breath. "We've been staying at different places since the accident, but they keep moving us around, and I don't want Lucas to be scared anymore." Daniel felt something break inside his chest. "What do you want from me, Emily?" Emily looked directly into his eyes with a maturity that shouldn't exist in someone so young. Her next words would echo in his mind for weeks, changing everything he thought he knew about his carefully ordered life. "I'll wash the dishes, and you adopt us." The restaurant seemed to freeze around them. Daniel stared at this little girl who had just made the most bizarre business proposition he'd ever heard. She wasn't begging. She was negotiating, offering her work, her service, in exchange for something she needed more than anything, a home. "You wash dishes," Daniel repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm good at it," Emily said quickly, "and I can clean and take very good care of Lucas. I promise we won't be any trouble. I just need someone to keep us together." Daniel's throat was tight. In all his years of corporate leadership, hostile takeovers, and million-dollar negotiations, no one had ever made him an offer that left him completely speechless. But what happened next would shock everyone who witnessed it, including Daniel himself. Daniel Mitchell stood slowly, his 6-foot frame rising over the little girl who had just made the most unusual business proposition of his life. Every conversation in the restaurant had stopped. Wealthy patrons at nearby tables stared openly, their crystal glasses forgotten as they witnessed something unprecedented in this temple of exclusivity. "You're coming home with me," Daniel said quietly. The words surprised him as much as they surprised everyone else. Emily's grip on her sleeping brother tightened, her knuckles white against Lucas's worn cotton shirt. "Tonight," she whispered, hope and disbelief warring in her expression, as if she'd been hurt too many times to trust what she was hearing. "Right now." Daniel reached for his phone, his fingers moving with the decisive precision that had made him a millionaire. "Marcus, bring the car immediately. I'm bringing guests." The word sounded strange on his tongue. When was the last time he'd had guests at home? When was the last time he'd invited anyone into his carefully controlled world? Emily's legs seemed to fail completely. She sank into the leather chair across from Daniel, Lucas still protected in her arms. And for the first time since she'd approached his table, she looked exactly like what she was, a frightened little girl carrying the weight of the world on shoulders too small for such a burden. "I don't understand," she whispered, tears beginning to stream down her dirty cheeks. "You don't even know us. You don't know our story or where we came from or why we're alone." Daniel crouched down to her eye level, ignoring the expensive fabric of his pants touching the restaurant's marble floor. His voice was gentler than it had been in any boardroom negotiation. "You made me an offer, Emily. A fair trade, your work for a home. I'm accepting, but here's my counter-offer. You don't wash my dishes, you don't work at all, you just be a child." The tears came harder now. Silent sobs shook Emily's thin body. Daniel felt something break deep in his chest, something that had been frozen for decades. "But if I don't work," Emily sobbed, "why would you want us?" The question hit him like a physical blow. This child had been taught that her worth was tied to what she could provide, what service she could offer. How many adults had failed her to create such a transactional view of love? "Because you're brave," Daniel said simply. "Because you love your brother enough to ask a stranger for help. Because everyone deserves a family." 25 minutes later, they were settled in the back seat of Daniel's Mercedes, the leather seats still warm from the interior heating. Emily pressed her face against the rain-fogged window, watching Seattle's glittering skyline pass by, while Lucas slept peacefully against her shoulder, finally relaxed for the first time since Daniel had met them. "Mr. Daniel," Emily's voice was small in the quiet luxury of the car. "Just Daniel?" She was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that revealed the depth of her fear. "Will you change your mind tomorrow, when you wake up and remember that you don't really know us?" Daniel's hands clenched in his lap. How many promises had been broken to make this child so fearful of hope? How many times had adults disappointed her? "No, Emily, I give my word, and I don't break my promises." But as the city lights reflected in the window, Daniel had no idea what he was really promising, or how completely these two children were about to transform his carefully ordered existence. Daniel's mansion sat on 3 acres of perfectly manicured gardens overlooking Lake Washington, its modern glass and steel architecture a testament to 20 years of relentless ambition. As they passed through the electronic gates, beyond gardens that cost more to maintain monthly than most families spent on rent, Emily pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass in quick, excited puffs. "It's like a fairy tale castle that Mama used to read to us," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. Daniel felt his chest tighten at the past tense. Used to read. These children had lost so much more than just their parents. They'd lost their entire world, their sense of security, their childhood innocence. Mrs. Chen, Daniel's housekeeper for the past 8 years, met them at the front door. Her usually composed expression faltered when she saw the children, but she'd worked for Daniel long enough to adapt quickly to his unexpected decisions, though he'd never made one that changed life this much. "Mrs. Chen, I'd like you to meet Emily and Lucas," Daniel said, suddenly feeling awkward in his own entryway. The marble foyer, with its 20-foot ceiling and crystal chandelier, seemed ostentatiously large. "They'll be staying with us." "How long will they be staying, Mr. Mitchell?" Mrs. Chen asked carefully, her eyes examining Emily's too small dress and Lucas's patched clothes with the practical assessment of someone who had raised 5 children. Daniel looked at Emily, who was staring at the chandelier with the same expression she might have used if she discovered real magic. The little girl seemed impossibly small in this vast space, like a bird that had found itself in a cathedral. "Permanently," he said, the word surprising him with its finality, its weight. Mrs. Chen's expression immediately softened, her professional reserve melting into something warmer. "The guest rooms upstairs will need fresh linens and some child-friendly adjustments. I'll prepare them immediately." Actually," Emily spoke up, her voice echoing strangely in the high-ceiling space, "Lucas gets really scared at night when he can't see me. We usually sleep together if that's not a problem." I know it might seem strange, but he has nightmares about—" She broke off, biting her lip. Daniel's throat constricted. Nightmares about what? Their parents' death? The chaos that followed? The uncertain weeks in foster care? "Of course, no problem," he said gently. "Mrs. Chen, could you prepare the blue room? It's large enough for both, and maybe—" He hesitated, realizing he had no idea how to care for children. "Warm milk, hot chocolate, and food. When did you last eat?" Emily's cheeks flushed deep red with shame. "This morning. The bread the kind lady at the restaurant gave us. She said not to tell anyone, but she felt sorry for us." Daniel closed his eyes, feeling sick. One meal in an entire day. These children were surviving on scraps and charity, while he complained about his expensive dinner getting cold. 2 hours later, after Emily and Lucas had taken warm baths in the guest bathroom and eaten their first real meal in weeks, Mrs. Chen's homemade chicken soup, fresh bread, and milk so cold it made Lucas laugh, Daniel found himself in uncharted territory. He was sitting on the edge of the guest bed, watching Lucas sleep in pajamas. Mrs. Chen had found from her own grandchildren's visits, while Emily fought to keep her eyes open, despite her obvious exhaustion. "Daniel." Emily's voice was sleepy, but with the worry that seemed to be her constant companion. "What is it, sweetheart? What if people come looking for us, the ones from the agency who were supposed to take care of us?" Daniel's jaw tightened. Agencies, legal complications, official procedures he'd bypassed in his impulse to help these children. But looking at Emily's terrified face, he knew there was absolutely no going back. "Let me worry about all that," he said softly. "Your only job is to worry about being 7 years old." When Emily finally fell asleep, her small hand still resting protectively on Lucas's back, Daniel sat in the darkness of his guest room, wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into, and why, for the first time in years, that uncertainty didn't terrify him. The first week was complete and absolute chaos. Daniel Mitchell, who could command a boardroom full of tech executives without breaking a sweat, who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers with icy precision, found himself completely out of his element when confronted with breakfast preferences, bedtime routines, and the complex emotional needs of 2 traumatized children. Tuesday morning brought the first crisis. Lucas, who had seemed calm the night before, took one look at Daniel approaching with a bath towel and began screaming with the raw terror of a child who had experienced too many changes too quickly. The sound cut through Daniel like a blade. Pure fear from someone so small. Emily appeared instantly, still in her borrowed pajamas, her hair messy from sleep. "Lucas, it's okay. It's okay, baby." She knelt beside the bathtub, speaking in gentle tones no 7-year-old should have to master. "Daniel is nice. He won't hurt you." "He's afraid of the big bathtub," Emily explained to Daniel, her voice casual as if this were perfectly normal. "He's used to baths in the sink." Daniel felt something twist painfully in his chest. Baths in the sink. These children had been living in places where they bathed in kitchen sinks, where a normal bathtub was too much luxury to expect. "Can you show me how?" Daniel asked quietly, and Emily nodded with the serious responsibility of someone much older than her years. But Emily's maturity was both remarkable and heartbreaking. She helped Lucas with everything, tying his shoes with careful concentration, brushing his teeth while singing a little song their mother had taught her, cutting his food into small, precise pieces. She was 7 years old, but moved through the world like a tiny mother, anticipating Lucas's needs before he even expressed them. "Emily," Daniel said on Thursday morning, watching her help Lucas with his cereal bowl, her own breakfast growing cold while she focused entirely on her brother's needs. "You know you don't have to take care of everything anymore, right? Taking care of both of you. That's my job now." Emily looked at him with those eyes that seemed too wise, too careful. "I know you said that, but he's my brother. I've always taken care of him." "Since when?" Daniel asked gently. Emily's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Daniel saw her face change, becoming distant and sad. "Since Mama got too tired to get out of bed. Since she started sleeping all the time and forgetting to make dinner." Daniel's coffee cup froze at his lips. How long was your mother sick, Emily? About a year, I think. Maybe longer. Time got confusing. Emily's voice was steady, but Daniel could see the pain underneath. Daddy was working all the time, trying to pay for her medicines, so I learned to take care of Lucas. I got really good at it. The revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. This 7-year-old child had been caring for a sick mother and a baby brother for over a year. The weight of responsibility she'd carried made his business pressures seem trivial, his complaints about stress laughably insignificant. That afternoon, while Lucas napped peacefully in the safety of their shared room, Daniel found Emily in the kitchen, standing precariously on a chair she'd dragged to the sink, methodically washing the lunch dishes with the focused concentration of someone performing a sacred duty. "Emily, sweetheart, what are you doing?" She looked over her shoulder at him, soap suds up to her elbows. "You said I could keep my part of our deal. I wash dishes. You give us a home. I always keep my promises." Daniel gently turned off the water and lifted her down from the chair, setting her carefully on the marble floor. "Emily, look at me. You don't owe me anything. This isn't a business transaction. You're not here because you can work for me. You're here because you're family now." Emily stared at him, genuine confusion written across her face, as if he'd spoken a foreign language. "But then why did you take us? If we're not useful, why would you want us?" The question pierced something deep in Daniel's soul. How damaged had this child's world been that she couldn't imagine being wanted simply for existing? Daniel crouched to her height, searching for words he'd never had to find before. "Because you were brave enough to ask for help when Lucas needed it. Because you love your brother so much you'd offer to work for a stranger just to keep him safe. Because everyone deserves someone who cares about them, and you two deserve that more than anyone." Emily's lip trembled, and Daniel could see her fighting against tears. "No one's ever taken care of me before. I don't know how to let someone do that." Daniel pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in decades, he held someone simply because they needed to be held, with no agenda or expectation beyond offering comfort to a child who had been forced to grow up too fast. The authoritative knock on Daniel's front door came on a Monday morning at exactly 9:47 a.m. Just as Emily and Lucas were finishing their breakfast of Mrs. Chen's homemade pancakes, the first relaxed meal they'd shared since arriving. Through the crystal-clear screen of the security monitor, Daniel saw a middle-aged woman in a grey government suit, holding an official clipboard and wearing the expression of someone accustomed to delivering unwelcome news. "Stay here with Mrs. Chen," Daniel instructed the children, but Emily's face had already lost all color, her fork clattering against her plate. "It's them, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of many disappointments. "They found us. They're going to take us back." Daniel felt his protective instincts flare with surprising ferocity. "No one is taking you anywhere." He opened the door to face Sarah Martinez from Child Protective Services, whose professional smile couldn't hide her obvious surprise at the mansion's opulent surroundings. Her eyes scanned the marble entryway, the expensive art, the obvious wealth, clearly recalibrating her approach. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Sarah Martinez from King County CPS. I'm here about 2 missing children, Emily and Lucas Harrison. We have reason to believe they may be on your property." Daniel's mind raced through possibilities, legal ramifications, potential strategies. He could lie, claim he'd never seen them, but through the open sightline to the kitchen, Emily and Lucas were clearly visible. Emily had moved protectively in front of her brother like a tiny sentinel. "They're here," Daniel said simply, stepping aside. "They're safe, they're fed, and they're staying." Ms. Martinez entered, her trained eyes immediately assessing the situation. She noted the children's clean clothes, their obviously improved health, the way they clung to each other, but didn't seem afraid of Daniel. "Emily, honey," she said in the carefully modulated tone of someone used to dealing with traumatized children. "We've been very worried about you and Lucas. You can't just disappear from your foster home like that." The Hendersons were concerned. Emily stepped forward, her chin raised with defiant courage. "It wasn't a good place. They yelled a lot and said they might not be able to keep both of us." Daniel felt his blood pressure rise dangerously. "What do you mean, might not be able to keep both of you?" Ms. Martinez sighed, clearly uncomfortable. "Lucas is young and adaptable. 3-year-olds are easier to place permanently. Emily has experienced significant trauma, and 7-year-olds who've experienced loss often have behavioral challenges that make placement more difficult. The Hendersons were willing to keep Lucas permanently, but Emily's situation was more complex." "No," Emily's voice cut through the room with surprising force. "We stay together. We promised Mama before she died that we'd never let anyone separate us. I won't break that promise." Daniel watched Emily transform before his eyes. From the frightened little girl who had cried in his car to a fierce protector who would fight anyone, including the system designed to help her, to keep her brother safe. "Ms. Martinez," Daniel said, his voice carrying the authority that had built his empire. "What would it take for me to legally adopt both children? What's the process? What are the requirements, and how quickly can we make it happen?" The social worker's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "Mr. Mitchell, adoption isn't something you decide overnight. There are extensive home studies, psychological evaluations, background checks, financial assessments, a minimum 6-month waiting period." "I have resources," Daniel interrupted. "I have an entire legal team, unlimited financial means, and most importantly, I have room in my house and my life for these children. What I'm asking is, can it be done?" Ms. Martinez looked between Daniel's determined face and the children, who now stood hand in hand, united in their silent plea to remain together. She saw something in this unusual picture that made her reconsider her standard procedures. "It's theoretically possible," she admitted slowly, "but it would require expedited processing, court hearings, extensive documentation, and in the meantime the children would need to return to their designated placement while we—" "No!" This time, Daniel's voice carried the finality of someone who had built an empire by refusing to accept unacceptable options. "They stay here. I'll hire the best family lawyers in the state. I'll jump through whatever legal hoops you deem necessary. I'll submit to whatever evaluation or analysis you consider required, but they don't get separated. And they don't leave this house unless it's their choice." Ms. Martinez stared at him for a long moment, clearly struggling between protocol and the children's obvious well-being. Finally, she reached for her phone with the resigned expression of someone about to make her day much more complicated. "I need to make several calls and speak with my supervisor. This is highly irregular, but—" She looked at Emily and Lucas, who watched her with the desperate hope of children who had been disappointed too many times. "Maybe we can work something out." That evening, after Ms. Martinez had left with promises of emergency hearings, expedited home studies, and legal processes that would normally take months compressed into weeks, Daniel found Emily on the terrace overlooking Lake Washington. She sat curled in one of the large patio chairs, her legs folded under her, staring at the city lights reflecting on the dark water like fallen stars. Lucas was inside with Mrs. Chen, building elaborate towers with wooden blocks she'd discovered in the attic, his 3-year-old attention completely absorbed in the simple joy of creation and destruction. "A penny for your thoughts," Daniel said, settling into the chair next to Emily, close enough to offer comfort, but far enough to give her space to process the day's emotional turmoil. Emily looked at him, then back at the water. "What if she decides we can't stay? What if she makes us go back to the Hendersons or somewhere worse?" "She won't. How can you be sure?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching the lights of a plane trace the distant horizon. "Because I won't let that happen. Because there are some things in this world worth fighting for, and you and Lucas definitely are worth fighting for." Emily studied his profile in the soft light of the terrace. "Why are you really doing this? And don't say it's because I'm brave or because everyone deserves family. There has to be more than that." The question he'd been dreading, delivered with the frankness of someone too young to understand social niceties. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? "Can I tell you a secret, Emily?" something I've never told anyone else." She nodded solemnly, recognizing the weight of what he was offering. "I grew up in foster care too, from 8 to 18 years old, 10 different homes, 11 different schools, more social workers than I can remember." Emily's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "You grew up, but you're so successful, so important?" "Success doesn't erase where you come from," Daniel said softly. "I know what it's like to pack everything you own into a garbage bag. I know what it's like to wonder if anyone will want to keep you, or if you're just temporarily convenient until something better comes along." The admission hung in the air between them. Years of carefully guarded privacy dissolved in service of helping this child understand she wasn't alone. "Did anyone ever want to keep you?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel felt the familiar ache of old rejection, softened now by time, but never completely healed. "No, but maybe that's exactly why I can keep you and Lucas. Maybe everything I went through, all the loneliness and uncertainty, was preparing me to be here when you needed someone who would understand." Emily was quiet for a long time, processing this revelation that reframed everything she thought she knew about this man who had entered her life like an answered prayer. Finally, she slipped her small hand into his much larger one, her fingers warm and trusting. "Daniel?" "Yes, sweetheart? I'm so glad you were in that restaurant that night. I'm glad you said yes." Daniel squeezed her hand gently, feeling something heal in his chest that had been broken for decades. "Me too, Emily. Me too." But as he sat there looking at the city lights, Daniel couldn't shake the growing feeling that there was something Emily hadn't told him about her parents' death. Something about their story that didn't quite fit, the way she sometimes stopped mid-sentence, the careful way she chose her words when talking about the accident. And he was absolutely right to worry, because the truth about what had happened to the Harrison family was far more complicated and dangerous than anyone suspected. A truth that would soon threaten everything Daniel was fighting to build. 3 weeks into their new life together, Daniel discovered that being a guardian meant more than providing food and shelter. It meant navigating the complex emotional landscape of 2 children who had experienced more loss than most adults could handle. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday night. Daniel was working late in his home office, finalizing the adoption papers his legal team had expedited, when he heard crying from upstairs. Not Lucas's usual nighttime tears, but Emily's deep, heartbreaking sobs that cut through the house's expensive soundproofing. He found her in the bathroom, sitting on the floor in her pajamas, holding a hairbrush with several long blonde strands tangled in its bristles. "Emily, what's wrong, sweetheart?" "I can't remember how Mama used to braid my hair," she cried, her voice breaking in despair. "She always did it before bedtime, but I can't remember the pattern. What if I forget everything about her?" Daniel's heart shattered. He knelt beside her on the cold bathroom floor, pulling her into his arms. "Oh, sweetheart, you won't forget. Love doesn't work that way." "But I already forgot what her laugh sounded like," Emily sobbed against his chest. "And Lucas doesn't remember her anymore. Yesterday, he accidentally called Mrs. Chen Mama." Daniel held her tighter, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. "Emily, listen to me. Your mama lives in all the ways you take care of Lucas, in your kindness, in your strength. Memory isn't just about sounds and pictures. It's about the love that shaped you. Would you help me learn how to braid my hair again?" Daniel looked at the brush in her small hands, thinking about all the things he'd never learned, all the parenting skills he'd assumed he'd never need. "I don't know how to braid hair. We could learn together." And so at 10 p.m. that night, Daniel Mitchell, CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire, sat on his bathroom floor with YouTube tutorials playing on his phone, learning how to braid a 7-year-old's hair while she taught him the lullaby their mother used to sing. "You're getting better," Emily said encouragingly, as Daniel struggled with his 5th attempt at a French braid. "Your mama would probably laugh at how bad I am at this." Emily smiled, the first real smile he'd seen when she talked about her parents. She would laugh, but she'd also say that trying is what matters. She always said, love isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up. Daniel's hands stilled in her hair. She sounds like she was very wise. She was. Even when she was sick, she tried so hard to take care of us. Emily's voice grew quiet. That's why what happened was so unfair. Emily, Daniel said gently, do you want to tell me more about the accident? Emily's body tensed. Yes, there was an accident, but she stopped, biting her lip. Daniel sensed he was approaching something crucial, something Emily had been carrying alone. But what, sweetheart? Can we finish my hair first? The story is too sad for right now. Daniel nodded, understanding that some truths needed the right moment. But as he worked the soft strands of her hair into a passable braid, he couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's careful words were hiding something darker than a simple accident. Daniel's first official meeting with Judge Patricia Coleman took place in her chambers on a Wednesday morning 2 weeks later. The family court judge was known for her tough but fair approach to child welfare cases, and Daniel had been warned that she didn't easily approve unusual adoption petitions. Mr. Mitchell, Judge Coleman said, reviewing the thick file spread across her mahogany desk, your petition is highly irregular. You're a single man with no prior parenting experience, requesting to adopt 2 children you've known for less than 6 weeks. Your Honor, these children were living on the street when I met them. Emily was 7 years old, carrying her 3-year-old brother, offering to wash dishes in exchange for a home. If that's not a testament to their need for stability, I don't know what is. Judge Coleman studied him over her reading glasses. Ms. Martinez speaks very highly of your home environment and your commitment to the children. However, there are some troubling gaps in the children's file. Daniel's attention sharpened. What kind of gaps? The circumstances of the parents' death, for starters. The original report lists it as a car accident, but there are inconsistencies. Hospital records that don't match the timeline. Witness statements that contradict each other. She flipped through several pages. More troubling, there are medical records suggesting Mrs. Harrison was treated for injuries consistent with domestic violence in the months before her death. Daniel felt ice form in his stomach. Domestic violence. The records are sealed, but what I can tell you is that this case may be more complicated than you initially understood. Are you prepared for the possibility that these children experience trauma beyond the loss of their parents? Daniel thought about Emily's careful words, her tendency to stop mid-sentence when talking about her father, the way she sometimes flinched at sudden loud noises. Yes, Your Honor, whatever they've been through, they deserve safety and love. I can provide both. Judge Coleman made a note in the file. I'm approving temporary custody while we complete the investigation into your background. But Mr. Mitchell, if we discover anything that suggests these children are in danger from their past or otherwise, this arrangement will be immediately re-evaluated. That evening, Daniel found Emily in the living room, curled up with a book, while Lucas built towers nearby with his beloved blocks. The domestic scene seemed precious and fragile, like something that could shatter at any moment. Emily, can I ask you something important? She looked up, immediately alert to the serious tone in his voice. Is it about the meeting with the judge? Partly. Emily, did he ever hurt your mother, or you and Lucas? The book slipped from Emily's hands, and Daniel saw fear flash across her face before she carefully composed herself. A too-practiced reaction for a 7-year-old. Why would you ask that? Because I need to understand what you've been through. And because if there's something you're afraid to tell me, I want you to know it's safe now. You're safe. Emily was quiet for so long, Daniel wondered if she would answer. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Daddy wasn't always mean. Before Mama got sick, he was fun. He taught me to ride a bike and made Lucas laugh all the time. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. But when Mama started needing medicine and couldn't work anymore, Daddy got angry a lot. He said it was too expensive, that we were ruining everything. Daniel's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice gentle. Did he hurt you? Not me or Lucas, but Mama. Sometimes she had bruises. She said she fell a lot because of the medicine. But I knew that wasn't true. I'm not stupid. Daniel pulled her into his arms, his heart breaking for this little girl who had witnessed things no child should see. "You're not stupid at all. You're incredibly brave, and I'm sorry you had to go through that." "The night of the accident," Emily whispered against his chest. "They were fighting really bad. Daddy was yelling about money and Mama was crying, and then they got in the car to go somewhere." She couldn't finish. Daniel held her tighter, finally understanding the weight she'd been carrying. The accident hadn't just taken her parents. It had ended a nightmare, but also left her with complicated grief for a father who had been both protector and threat. "Emily, you never have to be afraid like that again. I promise." But even as he made the promise, Daniel wondered what other secrets were buried in the Harrison family's past, and whether they were truly safe from whatever had destroyed Emily and Lucas's world. Daniel's phone rang at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, pulling him from the first deep sleep he'd gotten in weeks. The caller ID showed his security chief, Marcus, which immediately set off alarms in his system. "Sir, we have a situation. There's a man at your gate claiming to be the children's uncle. He's aggressive and appears to have been drinking." Daniel was out of bed and grabbing his clothes before Marcus finished speaking. "Don't let him anywhere near the house. I'm coming down now." Through the security monitors, Daniel could see a man in his 40s, unshaven and swaying slightly, pounding on the gate's intercom system. Even through the grainy footage, Daniel could see the family resemblance. The same blonde hair as Emily and Lucas. The same blue eyes, though these were red and wild. "Open this damn gate!" the man was screaming. "Those are my brother's kids. You can't just steal them." Daniel grabbed his phone and called the police before heading downstairs. As he passed the children's room, he could hear Lucas crying and Emily's gentle voice trying to comfort him. The shouting had woken them. "Stay in the room," Daniel called through the door. "Everything's okay." But Emily opened the door, her face pale with terror. "It's Uncle Ray, isn't it? Daddy's brother." Daniel's blood froze at the recognition in her voice. "You know him. He used to come to the house sometimes when Daddy was angry. They'd drink together and yell at Mama about money." Emily's voice was shaking. She was scared of him. He said mean things about Lucas, called him names because he cried too much. Daniel knelt to Emily's eye level. "He's not getting anywhere near you or Lucas. I promise." The police arrived in 10 minutes, but by then, Ray Harrison had escalated from shouting to throwing rocks at the security cameras. Daniel watched from his office window as 2 officers approached the man who was claiming custody rights over children he had apparently terrorized. "I'm their blood," Ray was screaming to the officers. "That rich bastard has no right to them. The parents left them to me." Daniel's legal mind immediately focused on the phrase, "left them to me." Ubiu. Was there a will, legal guardianship documents he wasn't aware of? The adoption proceedings had been expedited, but what if there were legitimate family claims? An hour later, after Ray Harrison had been arrested for public intoxication and disturbing the peace, Detective Maria Santos knocked on Daniel's door. She was part of the team investigating the original accident, and her expression was grim. "Mr. Mitchell, we need to talk. Mr. Harrison's claims about guardianship may have merit. We've discovered that Emily and Lucas's father left a will naming his brother as the children's guardian in the event of his death." Daniel felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "That's impossible. The children were in foster care when I found them." "That's because Ray Harrison was in jail for driving under the influence when the accident happened. When he was released, the children had already entered the system. But now that he's asserting his rights, Detective, these children are terrified of him. Emily told me he was abusive, that he made threats. I understand your concern, but legally blood relatives have priority in custody cases, especially when there's a will." Detective Santos seemed genuinely sympathetic. "However, there may be other factors at play here. We've been investigating the circumstances of the accident more thoroughly, and there are some disturbing findings." Daniel's pulse accelerated. "What kind of findings?" "Evidence suggests the accident may not have been accidental. We found brake damage that appears to have been deliberately caused. We're now treating this as a potential homicide investigation." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Murder. Someone had deliberately killed Emily and Lucas's parents, and now their uncle, possibly the same person who had terrorized their mother, was making custody claims. Detective, if Ray Harrison is a suspect in his brother's murder, surely that affects his custody claim. It would, if we had proof. Right now we have suspicions and circumstantial evidence, not enough to deny his claim to parental rights, but enough to continue investigating. She paused. Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask, has Emily ever said anything about the night of the accident? Any details that might help our investigation? Daniel thought about Emily's careful words, her reluctance to discuss that night, the way she'd said her parents were arguing about money before they left. She mentioned they were arguing before they got in the car, something about finances. That fits our theory. We believe Robert Harrison may have discovered something about his brother's business dealings, something worth killing for. Detective Santos handed him her card. Mr. Mitchell, I can't officially advise you to keep these children away from their uncle, but unofficially, I'd suggest you have very good security. As Daniel watched the detective's car disappear down his driveway, he realized that saving Emily and Lucas might be far more complicated and dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Somewhere out there was a man who had killed their parents and would probably kill again to get what he wanted. And what he wanted was sitting upstairs in Daniel's guest room, two innocent children who might be the key to exposing a murder. The revelation came 3 days later, not from Detective Santos or the legal team, but from Emily herself during what should have been a routine bedtime. Daniel was reading Lucas a story about brave bunnies when Emily suddenly spoke from her bed across the room, her voice cutting through the gentle narrative like a blade. Uncle Ray killed our parents. The book slipped from Daniel's hands. Lucas, already drowsy, barely stirred, but Daniel felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. Emily, what did you say? Emily sat up in her bed, her small body silhouetted against the nightlight. Her voice was steady, but Daniel could see her hands trembling as she finally released the secret she'd been carrying for months. The night they died, I wasn't sleeping when they started fighting. I heard everything. She took a deep, shaky breath. Daddy found out that Uncle Ray was stealing money from Mama's medicine fund. He was taking the money we needed for her treatments and using it for drugs and gambling. Daniel moved closer, his heart pounding. Emily, are you sure about what you heard? Daddy was screaming that Uncle Ray killed Mama just as much as if he'd poisoned her because she couldn't get the treatment she needed. He said he was going to the police in the morning, that he was going to turn Uncle Ray in for theft and fraud. The pieces were falling together with horrible clarity. Ray Harrison wasn't just stealing from his sick sister-in-law. He was essentially murdering her by denying her life-saving medical care. What happened next, sweetheart? Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. Uncle Ray came to the house that night. I heard through the bedroom wall. He was drunk and angry and said if Daddy went to the police, he'd make sure Daddy regretted it. They were yelling really loud, and Mama started crying and said they should leave, go somewhere safe until morning. Daniel's blood turned to ice. They left because they were afraid of your uncle. Mama said we could all go to her sister's in Oregon, start over where Uncle Ray couldn't find us. She was packing our things when I fell asleep. Tears began streaming down Emily's face, but I woke up when the police came. The accident had happened just a few miles from our house. Their car went off the road at Miller Creek. Daniel pulled Emily into his arms, his mind racing. Emily, did you tell anyone what you heard that night? I tried to tell the first social worker, but she said that children sometimes make up stories when they're traumatized. She said that car accidents happen, and I shouldn't blame Uncle Ray just because I was scared of him. Emily's voice broke. But I know what I heard, and I know Uncle Ray did something to their car. Daniel's hands were shaking as he reached for his phone. Emily, I believe you, and we're going to make sure everyone else believes you too. As he dialed Detective Santos's number, Emily grabbed his arm. Daniel, there's one more thing. The reason Uncle Ray wants us so bad, it's not because he loves us. What do you mean? Before Mama got really sick, our grandmother left us money in her will. A lot of money in something called a trust fund. Uncle Ray can only get it if he's our legal guardian. Emily's eyes were wide with understanding beyond her years. He killed our parents for money, and now he wants to use us to get more money. Daniel felt a rage, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Ray Harrison hadn't just murdered his brother and sister-in-law. He'd done it for profit, and now he wanted to exploit the very children he'd orphaned. "Emily," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the fury racing through him, "you were incredibly brave to tell me this, and I promise your uncle will never lay hands on you or Lucas or that money." But as he waited for Detective Santos to answer the phone, Daniel realized they were in a race against time. Ray Harrison's legal claim was being processed, and without concrete proof of his crimes, the system might hand 2 innocent children over to the man who had murdered their parents. The truth was finally out, but the fight was just beginning. Detective Santos arrived at Daniel's house in 30 minutes, bringing a child psychologist and a voice recorder. Emily's testimony, given in the safety of Daniel's living room with Lucas sleeping peacefully upstairs, provided the missing pieces investigators had been searching for months. "Emily, you're telling us that you heard your father threaten to go to the police about your uncle stealing money?" Detective Santos asked gently. Emily nodded, her small hand gripping Daniel's tightly. "Daddy said Uncle Ray stole more than $20,000 from Mama's medical fund. He had papers that proved it, bank statements and other stuff. He said Uncle Ray was going to jail. And you heard your uncle threaten your father that same night? He said if Daddy talked to the police, he would take care of the problem permanently." Those were his exact words. I remember because they scared me so much. The child psychologist, Dr. Williams, made careful notes. "Emily, did anyone coach you to say these things?" Emily looked confused. "What do you mean? Did anyone tell you what to say or suggest that your uncle did something bad?" "No. I wanted to tell someone the truth for so long, but nobody would listen. Daniel is the first grown-up who believed me." Detective Santos exchanged glances with Dr. Williams. "Emily, we're going to need you to repeat this statement in front of a judge. It might be scary, but it would help make sure your uncle can't hurt anyone else. Would you be brave enough to do that?" Emily looked at Daniel, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Will Daniel be there with me? If that's what you need to feel safe." "Yes." Emily straightened her small shoulders with determination that broke Daniel's heart. "Then I'll do it for Mama and Daddy. And so Uncle Ray can't hurt other people." Dream. The next 48 hours moved with the swift efficiency of justice finally awakened. Armed with Emily's testimony and new leads, investigators found the irrefutable proof they'd been seeking. Security footage from a gas station showing Ray Harrison tampering with a car that matched his brother's on the night of the accident. Ray Harrison was arrested on charges of first-degree murder, fraud, and child endangerment. His custody claim was immediately terminated, and Daniel's adoption petition was fast-tracked through the system. Judge Coleman called Daniel to her chambers a week later, this time with a very different attitude. "Mr. Mitchell, I've reviewed all the evidence in this case, including Emily's testimony and the criminal charges against Raymond Harrison. I'm prepared to approve your adoption petition immediately." Daniel felt tears he hadn't shed in decades threatening to overflow. "Your Honor, thank you. These children have been through more than anyone should have to endure." "There's one more thing," Judge Coleman said, pulling out another file. "The Children's Trust Fund, which was indeed Ray Harrison's motive for seeking custody, will be held until they reach majority. But there's enough in the fund to ensure they receive the best education and opportunities. Combined with your resources and commitment, these children have a chance at a truly bright future." That evening, Daniel gathered Emily and Lucas in the living room for the conversation he'd been dreaming of having. "I have some very important news," he said, kneeling to their level. "As of today, you're not just staying with me temporarily. You are officially and legally my children forever." Emily's eyes widened in wonder. "Really? Like adoption papers and everything?" "Adoption papers and everything. Emily Harrison Mitchell and Lucas Harrison Mitchell, if you want to keep your parents' name along with mine." Lucas, who had been quietly playing with his blocks, looked up with a smile that lit up the room. "Daddy Daniel, Daniel's heart swelled to bursting as he pulled both children into his arms. "Yes, buddy, Daddy Daniel." Emily hugged him fiercely, her voice muffled against his chest. "I knew that night in the restaurant that you were different. I could tell you were someone who keeps promises." As they sat together in the warmth of their living room, Daniel realized that the scared, lonely man who had dined alone that rainy night had been completely transformed. Emily and Lucas hadn't just gained a father. They had given him the family he never knew he was searching for. But there was still one final chapter to their story. One more crucial conversation that would determine not just their legal future, but the shape of the love that would define their family for years to come. 6 months later, Daniel found himself back at the Diamond restaurant. But this time, he wasn't alone. Emily sat across from him in a beautiful blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her choose, while Lucas wore his first real suit, a miniature version of Daniel's own. The same corner table where their story had begun now hosted a very different kind of meeting. "Are you sure you want to do this here?" Daniel asked Emily, who had requested this specific location for what she called their special dinner. Emily nodded solemnly, her blonde hair now healthy and shining, braided in the French braid she and Daniel had finally mastered together. "This is where our family started, where you said yes when I asked you to adopt us." Lucas, now 4 years old and bubbling with confidence, was carefully arranging his silverware in precise patterns, a habit he'd developed that reminded Daniel daily of how far they'd all come. The terrified little boy who used to cling to his sister was now a curious, joyful child who called Daniel Daddy without hesitation and filled the house with laughter. "Mr. Mitchell," the restaurant manager approached their table with genuine warmth. "It's wonderful to see you again and to finally meet your beautiful children properly." Daniel's chest swelled with pride he never knew he could feel. "Thank you, James. These are Emily and Lucas, my daughter and son." The word still gave him chills. Not his wards, not children he was sheltering, but his daughter and son. The adoption had been finalized 3 months ago, but Daniel didn't think he'd ever tire of saying it. "Daddy," Emily said softly, "I have something I want to give you." She reached into her small purse, another sign of how much she'd grown, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Daniel recognized it immediately as the drawing paper he'd bought for her when they discovered her artistic talent, one of many gifts that had emerged when she felt safe enough to explore her interests. Daniel unfolded the paper carefully, and his breath caught. It was a drawing of that first night, a little girl holding a baby beside a tall man in a restaurant. But in Emily's artistic vision, they weren't strangers. Golden lights surrounded the 3 figures, and written at the bottom in her careful 7-year-old handwriting were the words, "The night we found our family forever." "Emily," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I wanted you to have it forever, to remember that even when something seems impossible, sometimes miracles happen." Emily's eyes sparkled with unshed tears, but they were happy tears. "You saved us, but I think maybe we saved you too." Daniel reached across the table and took her small hand in his. "You absolutely saved me, sweetheart. I didn't even realize how empty my life was until you and Lucas filled it with love." Lucas, who had been listening with the intense focus he brought to important conversations, suddenly stood up in his chair and reached his arms toward Daniel. "Daddy, hug." Daniel lifted Lucas into his arms, and Emily came around the table to complete their circle. As they embraced in the elegant restaurant where it all began, Daniel marveled at the transformation they had all undergone. Emily was thriving in school. Her natural intelligence was no longer overshadowed by the weight of premature responsibility. She had made friends, joined the art club, and was learning to simply be a child. The nightmares had disappeared, replaced by dreams of becoming an artist or maybe a teacher who could help other frightened children find their voices. Lucas was enrolled in preschool and developing friendships with other children his age. His vocabulary had exploded once he felt safe, and recently he'd started asking Daniel endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how computers worked. Daniel never imagined that "Why, Daddy?" could become his favorite phrase. "You know what I realized?" Daniel said as they settled back into their seats, the warmth of their embrace still lingering around them. "What?" Emily asked. "That night 6 months ago, you didn't just ask me to adopt you. You asked me to become the person I was meant to be. You saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself." Emily smiled, and Daniel saw echoes of the woman she would one day become. Strong, compassionate, unafraid to fight for what mattered. "Mama used to say that love isn't about perfect people finding each other. It's about broken people healing together." Daniel felt tears streaming down his cheeks, not caring who might see the successful businessman crying in the city's most exclusive restaurant. "Your mama was very wise, and I think she'd be proud of the incredible young woman you're growing into and the wonderful boy Lucas is becoming." "Do you think they can see us?" Lucas asked with the natural curiosity of a 4-year-old. Daniel looked at his son, and felt the truth of his answer in every fiber of his being. "I think they can, and I think they're happy that their children found someone who loves them just as much as they did." As they shared their celebration dinner, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The scared, lonely man who had once dined alone every night had discovered that the biggest deal of his life hadn't happened in a boardroom. It had happened right here, when a brave little girl offered to wash dishes in exchange for a family. Emily had kept her part of the bargain in ways she never intended. She hadn't washed his dishes, but she had washed away his loneliness, his fear of vulnerability, his carefully constructed walls. She and Lucas had taught him that the most important success wasn't measured in profits or achievements, but in the love that grew between people who chose to care for each other. When they finally left the restaurant that night, Daniel carrying a sleepy Lucas, while Emily walked beside them chattering about their plans for their next vacation, Daniel realized he had found something more valuable than any fortune he'd ever built. He had found his purpose, his joy, his reason for being. He had found his family. And as they drove home through the Seattle night, past the city lights that had witnessed the beginning of their story, Daniel knew that their greatest adventures still lay ahead, not as strangers who had met by chance, but as a family united by choice, strengthened by love, and unbreakable in their commitment to each other. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest words. In their case, it began with, "I'll wash the dishes, and you adopt us." But it became so much more than anyone could have imagined, a love story that would last forever. If this story touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to believe in miracles. In the comments, tell us, what would you do if you were Daniel in that situation? And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next inspiring stories.